We now have details of the next big New World patch, and there's going to be some things that I want you to do now so you don't miss out on any of the big economic changes that are coming along with this patch. So let's talk about them. And the first one is going to be one of questionable value because we're not 100% sure what is going to be happening, and that is with Expedition Orbs. So they said in the dev update that the Expedition Orbs are going to be removed, which sort of implies that you won't be able to craft anymore or buy anymore from the faction vendor. So there's an immediate question there. If you already have the orbs, what do you do with them? Well, you are going to be able to get extra rerolls or gold, it says on the website, in an expedition if you run it and you have an orb. But if you're on a server where people are still selling their expedition orbs and mutated orbs and stuff like that, probably better to sell them now rather than later, because the dungeons are going to be free to enter. Yes, there's some time gating, but let's not talk about that here. Now, the bigger question though is what happens to the materials that you need to craft these orbs? Yes, the faction vendor one was pretty much dominating, but there's still stuff like obsidian, runestone, that really its main purpose is to craft these orbs. Now, if the orbs are going, what's going to happen to those materials? I'm presuming they're going to find a different use, but it might just be that they become worthless. So there's a question whether or not you want to gamble and hold it, or do you want to get rid now? When it comes to where we have like grey area information, it's going to be a bit of a gamble, unfortunately. Now, the reason I say that they may find a different use is that we heard that there's going to be a process of taking like legendary drops from a dungeon and effectively distilling them into the raw materials and then crafting one of the items that you actually want. So if you never get Fury, you get all the weapons but Fury, you can sort of salvage them and then eventually craft Fury. Now, maybe the materials that you use to make the orbs are now actually going to be used to make those weapons and stuff like that. So that's an open question there. Now, the next big change is to the double stat craft perks. So what's happening is basically items that are going to have, say, like Dex and Int are going to have slightly more stat than if it just had Dex. However, they said Constitution is not affected. So if you had Dex and Con, that's still going to have the same amount of stats, but if you have Dex and Int, that'll have more. Now, what does this mean? All those craft perks that we just refined to the single stat attribute perks, they now may have some value, except they don't, because to my knowledge, when it comes to the timeless shards, you don't get the option to craft the multi-stat attribute perks, if that makes sense. It's either strength, Dex, or whatever. You only pick one attribute. So there won't be any way of guaranteeing like a Dex and Int item with the perk of your choice via crafting. So those craft perks probably like not going to be that useful unless they change timeless shards, which they should, by the way. However, what it does mean, if you have any items right now that you're a bit like, oh, maybe this isn't very good, it is Dex and Int, or maybe you want to go on the trading post and buy like a Dex, Int, Resilient and whatever, then maybe it's a good time to do that because they're probably going to go up a little bit in value. And if you get an item that has like a weird combination of stats where you're like, oh, I like them both, but I want this for this build and I want this for this build and this is only useful for this one build, maybe it's worth keeping that because as I said, you're going to get more stats, or buying them and then maybe selling them. Another big thing that you shouldn't be doing right now, it's not exactly going to make you gold right now, is simply do not salvage your legendaries either from expeditions or in general, because they are buffing salvaging. You're going to be able to get this thing called a perfect salvage, which will give you like raw materials like I think they said gypsum, and it's going to give you like special stuff. I can't exactly remember exactly what they said, but basically salvaging your legendaries are going to be rewarding, so no point wasting your salvages now. Just put them in one of your banks somewhere, forget about them, and then when this patch goes live, just salvage them all. Now, I was just mentioning about the stat perks. Another thing to do is do not sell any of your crafting perks right now, because over 150 perks are getting buffed. Now, the only example that they gave was durability one, and that's not getting buffed or anything that's super useful, but the rest of them, they said they're actually trying to bring them in line with the select group of perks that people are using. That means all those perks that are worth like 0.5 gold or something like that, if that's the one that people decide is the meta, it could drastically go up in price. Now, I wouldn't recommend going buying all of those craft perks, like it's just too much of a crapshoot, but what I would recommend is just not selling the ones that you currently have. Anything that you get, just keep, and then when the patch comes out, people will talk about which ones are worth like the most. Keep your eye on those. Another thing to consider is the weapon perks are going to be better when on the weapon of choice. So if you have like Insatiable Gravwell, but it's on your weapon rather than your armor, it's actually going to be stronger on your weapon. That means if you find a weapon that has like a weapon perk on it, then it's probably worth like keeping and and seeing how much better it gets, because it might go from being a mere item to now being like best in slot. So if you see or you have any weapons with a weapon perk on the weapon, keep it, or maybe even worth buying some if you want to take a gamble, but that's a bit of a risk. Now, one thing I would recommend selling, it seems, is all of the trading clothing, if that makes sense. So weaponsmith pants, if you have that right now, I would suggest probably selling it. It sounds like they're going to make them easier to get, basically, and that's going to be the same for almost all of the trading clothing. So yeah, they're going to have special areas to get them, and they're probably going to have their drop rate increased. Now, that might not be the case, but that is definitely what it sounded like. I just don't see the point in holding on to them. Like, sell them, and if they go cheaper, you can always buy them back at the cheaper rate. It's unlikely they're going to go up, let's face it. Now, I was speaking about perks there on the weapons, but because of that change to all of the perks, and as I said, like, don't sell your craft perks, what I would recommend doing right now is not trying to buy any best in slot items. If you're like planning on, I wouldn't even craft right now personally if that was me, but I wouldn't definitely not buy anything. I wouldn't go spending 300k on an axe or something like that, because once all of these perks change, that best in slot may change with it, and you don't want your gold to be sort of, well, not wasted, but you don't want what you had to be less useful. It might be, you know, those people who spent like millions and millions on the best in slot, maybe now you're going to be able to obtain it for like 200k because a lot more perks are just as good. So I wouldn't buy any best in slot right now. One thing that is coming with the next patch is a new expedition, which is that pirate one, which I believe is going to be a lost expedition. So you could look at getting the expedition trophy materials. Now, another big change, which we're not 100% sure how it's going to work, is to the lower level refining materials. So they basically said that it sounds like all of the tiers of the refining materials are going to be removed. So like you're just going to get the stats of the like tier 5 one, so like obsidian flux, and it sounds like you'll be getting that from like level 1. That's just how you'll find them going forward. They did say that all of the old ones, so like the tier 4, tier 3, they will actually be able to be converted. Now you can obviously now convert them between the different tiers, like a tier 4 to a tier 4 of a different kind, but at the minute there's no way of transferring that from a tier 4 to a tier 5. It really depends on how expensive that is. Depends on if it's going to be worth either selling your green ones now or trying to convert them later and then selling them. That's an open question mark. But I would guess in the long term, what this means is that the refining materials overall are going to be coming down in price. Flux you'll see drop quite quickly, I think. Everything else will drop quite slowly, but they will drop over time. And yeah, I just think like the refining materials down, down, down. If you're hoarding a lot of them, probably sell. Now, one thing I want to talk about is if you are planning on leveling any of your professions, maybe wait. So the refining professions specifically, they are going to be, I think they said for refining and maybe gathering, basically they're going to get nerfed, as in they're going to be easier to do and to level up. I think they mentioned like refining from like 0 to 100, but I could be a little bit off on that one. But more importantly, we actually have to talk about weaponsmithing and furnishing. Both of these are going to be made a lot easier to level up. So right now, I personally would not be trying to level up any of my professions, and I would specifically not be trying to level up weaponsmithing or furnishing because they're going to be made easier. Now, without the patch notes, it's actually possible that some of the things that I said here might be slightly off. As ever, this is not financial advice, and I'm not a financial advisor. Make of this what you will, but those are some big impacts to the economy and possibly your gameplay that you need to pay attention to right now. Let me know the thoughts on this video. Did I miss anything obvious? Like and subscribe. Have a most beautiful day. Goodbye.